Point 9, coming to the short strokes. Job did get his satisfaction. This is I, the creator of all the ungovernable, ruthless forces of nature, which are not subject to any ethical laws. I, too, am an amoral force of nature, a purely phenomenal personality that cannot see its own back. That's Yahweh talking. In spite of his impotence, Job, the man, is set up as a judge over God himself. Edinger on page 52 says, it is a symbolic description of the dawning of a transpersonal dimension of consciousness that has the power of redemption. So it has to suddenly understand that these things are running through our lives all the time, and they are powers beyond our control, certainly, these archetypes. Then, by being able to understand them as human beings, we are redeemed in some sense. And I certainly feel this coming on me as we've been studying this. I mean, for a long time, I was pretty much an atheist. And, I regarded Buddhism as a philosophy, which it is. It has no particular metaphysical aspect to it, other than Rigpa, the divine ground, the pleroma, I guess, the Greeks would call it the pleroma.
It's a psychology, almost.
Pardon?
Buddhism is like a psychology.
Yeah, Buddhism is a psychology, sure. So I used to say, well, I'm practicing Buddhism, and I like it because there's no God, there's no hell, there's no heaven, there's no saints, there's no sinners, there's no right, there's no wrong. It just all is, right?
Chanting and incense and what was left.
Yeah, it's duality, right?
Go back a second, Skip, because basically what you're saying, that when we become conscious, we're basically realizing that the chaos that we experience all the time is...
Well, just because you're conscious doesn't mean you
we're
realize
not
that.
passing a judgment on it. It's basically all that it is, right?
It is, yes, that's right. It is. Okay, so if there's an earthquake or a tsunami or a snowstorm in April or whatever, I've been in a snowstorm in April up in Rochester, and so they just are, and we're able to cope with them. Okay, there's no good or evil to them, they just are there.
But it's still, whenever we have an example of suffering in our lives, then we're human and we grieve over that.
Sure. Right. We do suffer.
So that grieving is kind of an indulgence of the unconscious in the sense that it's not really being transcended over that. It's still making a judgment about this is a bad thing.
Well, it can do that, sure, and this is this Job archetype, which is you're defeated, there's some sort of contest, the snow's coming down, and it's going to drop 2 feet of snow on you, and there's nothing you can do to stop that, so you're defeated by it, and then you can sit at home and mope about it, but, there's a revelation, which is, oh, by the way, next week it's going to be 70 degrees. Right? Something like that. I mean,
we all do that to some extent.
I'm being flipped.
Do that, right?
Pardon? We all do that,
do that.
sure.
You don't need Jung to do that.
No, we don't need Jung to do that. They're only observing that it happens and that we need it. And in order for us to grow in our consciousness, then we need it to happen. We need to have the experience. And so having the transpersonal experience you don't want to be taken away by it, right? I had the experience when I wrote that novel, right? And a few other times in my life, I've had a transpersonal experience. I mean, you have it when you're making love to your partner and things are going good, then you have a transpersonal experience with that person, right? But you don't want to be carried away with it. You know, you can't stay in bed for a week, except maybe on your honeymoon, and even then
They
it's.
do that in the movies, though.
And they do it in the movies, but you know,
At least in the old movies.
no, but all these guys are saying that you can't identify with the transpersonal thing, whatever
That's
it
the
is.
inflation.
Yeah, that would be inflation,
And the opposite is
depression, alienation. So, you know, a mother can't be a mother. She can't be living the mother archetype all the time. If she did, she'd be going around saying, "Oh, gather everyone to me." You know? I mean, we have people. Yeah, eat your beans, whatever it is, right?
the Jewish mother.
Right. Or the Japanese mother, benko. But you can't do that all the time. You have to.
So the mother archetype is a temporary state then.
All these archetypes need to be temporary states, because if they're permanent states, then you have a problem. Okay, so the warrior archetype. Let's take George Patton. Okay, George Patton was the warrior archetype, but when the war was over, when World War II was over, he was lost. You know, he couldn't get out of it, right?
He invested so much of inflation.
He was so inflated on the warrior archetype that he couldn't get back to reality.
So
Right.
what do you need? Therapy at that point? I mean, do you need to keep it at arm's distance so it doesn't consume you?
Right.
Like understand that it's
Well, I mean,
got
normally
its purpose?
these things adjust naturally, right?
Well, it did for him. He got hit by a lot of trucks.
Yeah, he got hit by a truck or something and was killed. Yeah, like
I
four,
realize
The balance was
No, no.
restored.
no, 4 months after the war, Patton was run over by a truck. Right.
That's horrible.
You know,
Why am I laughing? That's
so
awful.
you know, so he was probably depressed. You know, he was probably depressed, moping along because his war was over, right?
Okay.
And you know, no, I don't have a war anymore, and I'm a warrior. You know, and so he was probably, you know, lost somewhere in that sort
He
of
was kind
thinking.
of out of joint with nature.
With-
it sounds like.
He was out of joint with. He couldn't come back to peace, the peacetime world.
He barely handled wartime. He was fond of demoting a lot of times because he was outspoken and made such embarrassing remarks.
Well, and you know, he got megalomaniac on the other end, right? Because he was going around whipping up on troopers. Right? Remember, he slapped a trooper in front of the press in Sicily, and he lost his command. And Eisenhower made him go around and talk to women's groups in Britain for about a year.
And then he put him in charge of the phony army.
Right, and they put him in charge of a phony army.
Cardboard tanks.
Right. Because he'd gotten too inflated, right? So they had to bring him down to.
So the military actually, it's like they use it to their advantage because they train that archetype, but they also recognize when it's out of hand.
Well, I don't know if they all recognize it, but certainly in my experience, senior officers that I'm familiar with are pretty well balanced people. I mean, I knew one Marine lieutenant colonel that was wacko like that. Okay, you know, he was.
He wasn't going to make general. So.
No, he didn't make it general.
usually
They
clip
forced
him
him out. They forced him
They
out,
clip-
right?
They clip him out.
Yeah, they clip him out.
Rico was pretty inflated too.
Actually, though,
Admiral Rickover.
My man that was.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the only time he was in the uniform of a full admiral was the day they dedicated Rickover Hall at the Naval Academy. The rest of the time, from 1953 on, he didn't wear his uniform. He refused. Yeah, he wore civilian clothes.
Why did he do that?
I don't know. It wasn't. I mean,
It was a quiet kind of inflation because he did have. There are these stories about how he interviewed his captain,
yeah.
and he would say, first of all, they sat on a chair that had the legs in the front were shorter than the legs in the back, and then he would ask them. He would order them to do something that would make him intensely angry, and if they didn't pass the test, he wouldn't hire them as his son. This
Right.
is anecdotal, but one guy went around.
Thank God I didn't get hired by
One guy picked up all of his submarine models and smashed them into bits on his desk, and Rickover was very, very upset that he hired him.
Is that right?
He wanted an aggressive captain.
Uh-huh.
You can keep it on bad news.
Well, Rickover story I heard was, do you remember the guy who played the rifleman, Chuck something?
Yeah,
Who,
I know him. Yeah.
anyway, the guy that played on television in a show called The Rifleman, this is like in the 50s.
Connors.
Chuck Connors, okay. Yeah, so Chuck Connors was a submariner, and he had been hired by Rickover, and Rickover was interviewing every officer that went into the nuclear fleet. Okay, every officer, not just captains, every officer. In order to be selected for nukes, you had to go through Rickover. And so Chuck Connors walked into his office one day, and as he walks through the door, there's a baseball bat flying at him. Literally, Rickover flung a baseball bat across the room at him, and Chuck Connors just reached. Yeah, and Chuck Connors had been a minor league baseball player, so he just reached up and caught it. No problem. So he was hired.
They quit.
He wanted cool and calm.
But I don't think that's inflation. I think that's knowing
Just a shrewdness or
shrewdness or knowing what you expect of an officer that's going to be under the water for 70 days, every other 70 days. Pardon?
Discerning? Would that be
Yeah, and quick, quick response time and quick on your feet. And so it was a way of separating the wheat from the chaff. I don't think that that's necessarily inflated. And, Rickover didn't depend on his medals, his ribbons, and his gold braid
well, it's well
for his power,
taken.
right?
Well taken.
When he walked in the room, everybody paid attention. He didn't need the gold braid, It's like me, I don't have any need to prove who I am as a Marine. Not at all. I don't even care what you guys think about it. I honestly don't, right? But
Why would we think about it?
yeah, why would you think about it? But the point is, I lived in a hole in the ground with a Sergeant E5 for 4 months. And when we were in that hole in the ground, it was Jerry and Skip. We weren't wearing our tunics. We were in T-shirts, and we were very cordial. But when we came up out of that hole, there was no question who was in charge, right? Never a question. And so that's a confidence. It's a kind of confidence. It's not an inflation.
Someone like Mussolini would be inflated.
Well, I think that's something guys learn to do pretty young now if they do anything with
Sure.
other
But
guys.
it's a hierarchy, isn't
Yeah, I mean, we run around in gangs all the time.
Yeah, but everybody knows the pecking order, right? Bill?
I had a gang too, but I was the boss.
No, but all men.
All right, light up.
He kept it manageable.
But
But I was happy.
but in groups like that, all men pretty much know the pecking order, right?
Yeah.
They don't need to see rank insignia.
Well, they either, if they don't, then they sort it out.
They
But,
quickly learn, right?
you know, it's sort of like you find a place, and it's not usually an ego thing. I mean, if some guy wants to be the leader, everybody's probably like, shit, I don't want to do that. You know, let him be the leader. We'll do what he says. If he does something wrong, we'll kill him.
Right. Yeah, well, that's right. That's what happens, isn't it?
Yeah.